and Palestinian flags. Clashes on the streets of London over geopolitical disputes on the other side of the world has many wondering, has multiculturalism failed?
Yes.
Well, to discuss this, well, not you, Will. I'm here. I've got actually someone much better
answered. Show's over.
Proper political commentator and podcast host, Sunil Sharma. Sunil, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You know, we're quite disturbed to see every week or so now we've got a protest about a foreign country or a foreign war on our streets. People will be asking, London particularly just had its policing cut by the government and the mayor. They'll be asking, is this, multicultural must have failed us. We can't keep on having foreign wars play out on our streets of London.
For sure, I think there's no doubt multiculturalism has failed the UK. What's going on with India, Pakistan? Here's the big difference with the leadership in India, with Narendra Modi, unlike the UK and a lot of the West. Narendra Modi and India will put the interests of Indian people first. Following this attack, before this attack, that's what they're going to do. In the United Kingdom, you could argue for the last 20, 30 years, we've not done that. We listen to a small but very loud minority and have just ignored the vast majority of people. Today it's India, Pakistan. Tomorrow it's Israel, Palestine. The following day it's Russia, Ukraine. You're allowed to be as nationalistic as you want about any other country aside from Britain, even if you live in Britain, because if you are nationalistic about Britain, you're far right, you're a bigot, and you're all these other different things. And I think it's no wonder that this is happening, because regularly children, society, we're constantly talked about how bad, all the bad things Britain have done, nothing good. There's a void in a lot of people's lives. And if you have some attachment to maybe a land where your parents are born or where you're from, you're more likely to almost show more loyalty to those countries than the country you live in. And I think that's a reoccurring theme. It's fine for people to have attachments to where they were from or where their ancestry from. It makes perfect sense, but your loyalty should be to the United Kingdom. And that concept is really only foreign in the UK and a few other Western countries. You go outside the West, this is the normal situation. You're proud of your country. All leaders serve the best interests of their country. But this is something that is like really foreign and become really foreign in the UK for the last 20, 30 years. And people are just not allowed to say this anymore. And I think that's why and then add into the combination of mass migration, the way the numbers, essentially the fabric of society is completely changed, then this makes it a lot easier. So I think there's no doubt to me and using a few outliers examples, which a lot of people do, does not mean that if you look at the vast sums of this country have been and are in decline. The UK has been in decline for more than 20 years. The UK is nowhere near the same power it was 20, 30 years ago. To me, that pretty much tells me multiculturalism failed. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been some good aspects of it, but to me, overall, it has most certainly failed.
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up one of the points you just said there, Sunil, and I want to invite the panel to ask questions as well. But, it does seem to me that when British people go out and protest about things that are affecting this country, and they may protest on many different things, including two-tier policing, they're met with mass amounts of police in riot gear. They're met with counter-protest, anti-fascist so-called people out on the streets. Why are they not being met with the same resistance when it comes to foreign wars and foreign protests being played out on the streets? Because it doesn't seem to be the case, does it?
No, I don't think so. I think the reality of this government in particular, you could argue previous governments as well, but I think this government, they don't understand the concerns of working class people. They're unaffected. So to them, they don't actually understand the impact that mass migration has on a country. They don't understand it because it doesn't really matter for them. They don't understand when the NHS is getting worse and worse, even though we're spending more and more. They don't understand that classroom sizes are getting bigger and bigger. So teacher per student is actually really at a horrible level, and it's so bad for them. They're unaffected by this, so why would they care about some of these issues? For them, Ukraine, Russia is a really big deal because in their own bubble, in their own lives, they're unaffected by it, their peers are unaffected by it, and I think that's a really sad state. And I think the reality is, if you look at what children are being taught at school right now, which is constantly being rammed down by everything bad Britain has done, and then you look at what's going across the world and you see all these different issues, I think it's a lot easier for them to almost take sides with matters that they don't really fully understand. But, we're so embarrassed to talk about anything good about Britain. There's plenty of other countries that are more than happy to almost talk about their strengths as opposed to weaknesses. So I'm not surprised that it's happening. Like I said, today it's India, Pakistan. Tomorrow will be Israel, Palestine, and then it'll be Russia, Ukraine, and then it'll be something else. It will rarely be actual Britain talking about some of the problems that Britain's facing.
So, hello. I mean, I'm afraid I just don't understand almost anything you've just said. And I'll explain why. Almost every single person watching this show has probably been treated by a doctor, either who has come from abroad themselves or whose parents or grandparents came from abroad. Similarly, they will have been treated by a nurse. Let me finish the question, okay? Let me finish the question. They will have been treated by a nurse. When my dad died of mesothelioma a couple of years ago, the NHS produced around about 30 carers to help me and him and my mother and my brothers in the final months of his life. Every single person who treated him, all 30 of them, roughly 30 people, were not born in this country. They had either come from an African country or they'd come from a Caribbean country. And they treated him as if he were their own father. That's just one example, but it's an example that will be shared by so many people watching this programme.
Let me
give you other examples. We have very successfully assimilated people in this country. Just look at our various sports teams. Look at the takeaways that millions of people will be taking home tonight. If you think multiculturalism has failed and you reject it, refuse to be treated by a foreign doctor or someone comes from immigrant parents or immigrant stock, refuse to support the England cricket, football and rugby teams, refuse to be treated by nurses, refuse to eat in Indian restaurants and so forth.
Yeah.
I've made a statement, and my question to you is, do you reject what I've just said?
I think you should be concerned about the fact that we rely on our NHS system relies on people from outside the UK. I think you should be worried about the fact that although you're talking about England national, you're talking about outliers. I'm talking about the fact that 80% of this country belongs to a demographic which is your skin colour. And I think if you look at what's happened,
75%.
If you look at
Actually, 82.
You're wrong.
Okay,
my question would be...
Let Sunil finish very quickly. I'll bring you in, Will.
Sunil,
hang on, Sunil's just talking. Hang on, let's finish.
Sorry.
I think, Matthew, picking emotional outliers isn't the fair reason.
Outliers.
Lying. But they are outliers. Because the vast majority of this country has been in decline. And what I think you're failing to understand is no one is saying we should close the borders. No one is saying that there should be no immigrants, there should be no migrants. I'm a product of immigrants. But what we're saying is when my parents came to 60s, 70s, 80s, this group of people is the mass migration numbers were a lot less. So it's easier for them to adapt to a country when the numbers are a lot less. When you increase those numbers to where they are now, to these record numbers, they are unsustainable. Therefore, a lot of people don't have to adapt to the UK. It's a really simple, basic concept. I know you can talk about emotional outliers, but if you actually look at statistical analysis...
I'm talking about doctors and nurses and the England sports teams and the takeaways that we all have.
Matthew, let him finish.
You guys are the people talking about outliers. You're talking about a tiny demonstration. That is an outlier.
You wanted him to stop to speak over you. Don't do the same back to him.
It's really basic. If there's a mass change in population, no matter, that's going to have some seriously negative effects to the majority of the country. It doesn't matter if that's UK or anywhere else. And I think what we're failing to understand is we go down this emotive example, we talk about good examples of migrants, which is obviously there's always going to be good examples. But when you change the fabric of society, the amount that it's changed in the last 10, 15 years, there's going to be some serious repercussions. And I think we should have an open and honest conversation about this instead of talking about few emotional outliers. I don't think that's fair. I think that's not, it doesn't make sense.
Okay, Emma?
Sunil, because I actually listened to what you said, I'm going to ask you a question, a direct question that's relevant to what you actually said. Look, some of these people who are out and protesting, not just this protest, but also many others that we've seen, and a lot of these conflicts in other countries become quite violent. A lot of the people who are out and protesting, they might be second, third, fourth generation living in this country. Should people be concerned that, on the one hand, we have the government will say, these people are British, maybe these people will say that they're British, but when push comes to shove, when there's a contentious issue to do with the country that they feel is their actual homeland, that they then go out into the streets protesting and also then potentially, causing some serious disruption, maybe even rioting, which we've seen on other occasions. Have we gone beyond the point of no return when it comes to saying, look, no, actually, if you're going to live here in this country and call yourself British, then you have to integrate. You have to have loyalty primarily to this country and not be so upset about things that are going on in other countries around the world?
Look, I think people should have a right to protest as long as it's peaceful and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good point in terms of I think the loyalty and attachments is a serious problem in the UK now. It's normal, I think, if you're from immigrant background or what, to have an attachment to your ancestral home or ancestral place where your parents were. But the loyalty should be towards Britain. I think we've done a really bad job as Brits in terms of really enforcing that. And I think it's very tough for British people to say this, in particular if you are white, because the first thing somebody would say is you're being racist. And I think that's a really terrible thing. You look across the world, you look at India, Africa, and I think sometimes in the West we think the West is the world, but it's a very common, it's a more than common belief that the country you live in, you should serve the country you live in. That is the interest. You serve the interests of that country. You work for the interests of that country. You adapt to that country, and you essentially have loyalty to that country. And it's not a foreign concept, but I think in the UK, I'm sure maybe it started with good intention, but it's now been. I think the last 30 years, I think we've moved away from people having some attachment to now actually being loyal to countries outside the UK, and I think that's terrible for the.
Should Will support?
Matthew, listen, come on, guys.
You
This is
understand the concept
guys.
of interview.
I'm the host of this show. Hang on, everyone be quiet. No, we've got to wrap up. So, Sunil, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. Really appreciate it. It's been very, very fiery. Still to come tonight.
Fighting hoaxers.